In the year 37 AD, Rome rejoiced. The grim, paranoid reign of Emperor Tiberius was over. In his place rose a figure of immense popularity, a young man seen as a breath of fresh air, a symbol of a brighter future. He was Gaius Caesar, better known by his childhood nickname, Caligula, Little Boot. He was the son of the beloved hero Germanicus, a living connection to Rome's most celebrated general. His accession was met with wild enthusiasm. The people saw in him the promise of a new golden age, and for a time, he delivered. Caligula's first months as emperor were a dream come true for Rome. He issued bonuses to the Praetorian Guard. Securing their loyalty, he destroyed Tiberius's treason papers, ending the era of purges and paranoia. He recalled exiles, reformed the tax system, and staged lavish games and chariot races for the adoring public. He was everything the people wanted, generous, charismatic, and a stark contrast to his gloomy predecessor. The Golden Prince had arrived, but this dream would soon curdle into a nightmare. About 7 months into his reign, Caligula fell gravely ill with what historians call a brain fever. The entire empire held its breath, praying for the recovery of their beloved emperor. He did recover, but the man who emerged from the illness was not the same one who had entered it. Something inside him had shattered. The first sign of the darkness to come was his chilling ingratitude. Men who had vowed to give their own lives for his recovery were now seen as irritants. He forced his father-in-law Marcus Silanus to commit suicide. He executed the Praetorian prefect, Macro, the very man who had secured his throne. The logic was terrifying. Their eagerness for his death in exchange for their own was now proof of their disloyalty. Paranoia, like a poison, began to seep into every corner of the imperial palace. He saw conspiracies everywhere. Senators who had once praised him were now viewed with suspicion. He began to demand not just respect, but worship. The line between man and God, already thin for a Roman emperor, began to dissolve completely in his mind. The adoring crowds in the forum did not yet know it. The senators whispering in the Curia could only guess. But the Golden Prince was dying, and a monster was taking his place. The poison of absolute power, activated by a mysterious fever, was beginning its work. Rome's brief, happy dream was over, and its descent into a reign of terror had just begun. The poison of paranoia had taken root in Caligula's mind, and from it grew a terrifying new delusion, that he was no longer a man, but a living god. He began appearing in public dressed as various deities, Hercules, Neptune, Venus. He demanded that a temple be built to his own divinity and ordered the heads of famous statues of gods, including the revered statue of Zeus at Olympia, to be replaced with his own likeness. For the Roman elite, this was not just arrogance. It was sacrilege, but to challenge a god was to invite death, and Caligula reveled in their fear. His reign became a systematic humiliation of the Senate, the very institution that represented the pride of Rome. He would force distinguished senators to run for miles beside his chariot or to serve him dinner dressed as slaves. These were not random acts of cruelty. They were calculated demonstrations of his absolute power. The ultimate act of contempt was reserved for his beloved horse. Incitatus Caligula housed the horse in a stable of marble, with an ivory manger, and a collar of precious jewels. He would invite the horse to dine with him, and then came the ultimate insult to the Senate. He announced his intention to make Incitatus a consul, the highest office in the Republic. The message was brutally clear in Caligula's eyes. His horse was more worthy of power than the most distinguished men in Rome. This divine lifestyle was incredibly expensive. The treasury, which had been full when he took power, was quickly drained by his lavish games, extravagant building projects, and personal luxuries. To fund his madness, Caligula turned to systematic extortion and murder. He revived the treason trials he had once abolished, but now they were a tool for profit. Wealthy citizens would be accused of treason, their estates confiscated, and their names conveniently found in his will. The moral decay spiraled. Roman historians like Suetonius tell of his debauchery's alleged incestuous relationships with his sisters, particularly his favorite, Drusilla. He was said to have turned the imperial palace into a brothel, forcing the wives and daughters of senators to serve his guests. No one was safe from his desires. No boundary was left uncrossed. The emperor was now a god in his own mind, a predator on a throne. He was all-powerful, yet he was terrified of everyone. He slept little, haunted by nightmares, often wandering the corridors of his palace at night, screaming for the dawn to come. The man who demanded to be worshipped as Jupiter was living in the private hell of a mortal consumed by fear. Rome was no longer an empire. It was the personal property of a divine monster. Caligula's madness was not confined to the palace. It spilled out into the world in grand, absurd, and monumentally wasteful displays of ego. He seemed to be waging a war not against Rome's enemies, but against reality itself. His most infamous project was the Great Bridge of Baiae. A soothsayer had once claimed that Caligula had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the Bay of Baiae. To prove the prophecy wrong long after he had already become emperor, Caligula ordered a temporary floating bridge to be built across the nearly 3-mile-wide bay. He requisitioned countless merchant ships, anchored them side by side, and had a road built on top of them, creating a structure that crippled the region's grain supply. For 2 days, he paraded back and forth across this pointless bridge, once wearing the breastplate of Alexander the Great, in a spectacular display of divine power and logistical insanity. Then came his military campaigns, which descended from grand strategy into pure farce. He marched to legions to the northern coast of Gaul, to the shores of the English Channel, ostensibly to launch the invasion of Britain. The soldiers were assembled, the stage was set for a historic conquest, but there was no invasion. Instead, Caligula, in a moment of supreme madness, ordered his soldiers to attack the ocean itself. Legionaries, the conquerors of the world, were commanded to wade into the surf and stab at the waves with their swords and javelins. The final act of this bizarre war was the ultimate humiliation. After conquering Neptune, Caligula declared the battle won and ordered his men to collect seashells from the beach. These shells, he proclaimed, were the spoils of the ocean, a tribute that the sea itself had paid to its new conqueror. He took these shells back to Rome to display in his triumph. His campaign in Germania was no less theatrical. Lacking any genuine victories to celebrate, he simply invented one. He took members of his personal Gallic bodyguard, had them disguise themselves as Germanic warriors, even forcing them to dye their hair red to fit the stereotype, and then paraded these fake prisoners through the streets of Rome in a staged and hollow victory procession. These acts were more than just the whims of a madman. They were a profound insult to the pride and discipline of the Roman army. He had humiliated the Senate, and now he had mocked the legions. The whispers of conspiracy that had started in the darkened halls of the Curia now found fertile ground in the barracks of the Praetorian Guard. The emperor had become a deadly clown, and the laughter was turning to rage. The final act of his tragicomedy was being written not by Caligula, but by the very men sworn to protect him. The emperor had mocked the Senate and humiliated the army. He had declared himself a god and ruled through terror. The breaking point had been reached. In the corridors of power and the barracks of the Praetorian Guard, a conspiracy began to take shape. The plot was led by a man with a personal grudge, Cassius Chaerea, a senior officer in the Praetorian Guard. Caligula had relentlessly taunted Chaerea for his high-pitched voice, forcing him to use embarrassing passwords. For Chaerea, this was not just about saving Rome, it was about reclaiming his honor. He found willing allies among other disgruntled officers and senators who feared they would be next on the emperor's list. The moment came on January 24, 41 AD, during the Palatine Games. As Caligula was leaving the theater to address a group of young actors, the conspirators cornered him in a secluded underground passageway beneath the palace. Chaerea struck the first blow, slashing the emperor across the neck. As Caligula stumbled, the other conspirators swarmed in, a frenzy of pent-up rage unleashed. Senators and guards alike plunged their daggers into the emperor's body, stabbing him over 30 times. The god-emperor died on the cold stone floor of his own palace, a victim of the very violence he had so enjoyed inflicting on others. Chaos erupted. In the confusion, the assassins sought to wipe out Caligula's entire line. His wife, Melonia, was brutally murdered. Their infant daughter, Fullia Drusilia, was snatched from her mother's arms, and her head was smashed against a wall. For a brief, heady moment, it seemed the Republic might be restored. The Senate began to debate a future without an emperor, but they had forgotten who held the true power in Rome. The Praetorian Guard. Having just assassinated one emperor, the Guard had no intention of losing their privileged position while searching the palace. A group of guardsmen found a terrified figure hiding behind a curtain. It was Claudius Caligula's uncle, a stammering, limping scholar who had been considered a harmless fool and thus spared from Caligula's purges. In a moment of supreme irony, the guards, instead of killing him, dragged him out and hailed him as the new emperor. They knew a weak, pliable emperor was better for them than a strong republic. The Senate was forced to accept their choice. The man who murdered the emperor was a Praetorian Guard. The man who chose the next emperor was the Praetorian Guard. Caligula's reign of terror was over. But his assassination had cemented a dangerous new reality. The emperor served at the pleasure of the soldiers sworn to protect him. The monster was dead, but the machine that created him was now in control.
We have witnessed the destructive madness of a single man. Now, we turn our gaze to a different kind of tragedy, not the death of an emperor, but the death of knowledge itself. There was a place, a shining beacon of the ancient world, that held the collective wisdom of humanity, a library containing hundreds of thousands of scrolls, lost histories, forgotten philosophies, scientific discoveries that would not be made again for 1,000 years. It was the mind of the world, all gathered under one roof. But it vanished. Was it a single, catastrophic fire? Was it destroyed by war? Or was it a slow, painful death by 1,000 cuts, bled out by ignorance and fanaticism? Next time, we sift through the ashes of history to uncover the true, heartbreaking story of the greatest library the world has ever known, and the day that knowledge died. Subscribe and discover what humanity has lost forever.